Hello everyone, hope you are enjoying your summer so far, and thank you so much for tuning in to August's Patreon reward video. Those of you listening right now are my $10 and higher patrons for the month of August, so I just wanted to quickly say thank you all so much for your support and for your pledge that made this all possible and makes it possible for me to continue to be doing art and sharing this with you guys. I am very grateful. For those of you who are new to this type of video, basically it's almost like a visual podcast where I will be answering some of the questions you guys sent me on Patreon while we play this 35-minute long time lapse of a painting selected by you guys. So this month's winner is titled Periphery, and she is an eerie alien moth fairy with very cool and unhuman skin tones. So I hope you guys enjoy this one, and thank you to all who voted. And I'm just going to quickly dive into all the questions you guys asked me, and hopefully I can cover all or most of them before the 35 minutes is up. So the first question is from Maya Lewis, and she says, "Hi Happy, lots of love from my friends Chrissy and Subin and I from Los Angeles. I wanted to know if you ever create pieces based on yourself, your childhood, or your upbringing. I know that your art is geared more towards fantasy, so I was curious about how personal your beautiful work is. Thank you." Thank you so much, Maya, and hello to your friends in LA as well. So my pieces, even though they are generally geared towards fantasy and surreal themes, I actually don't think they match at all with my childhood, but rather they're kind of a reflection of my current interests and I guess my current taste. So I had a fairly normal-ish upbringing. I immigrated to the United States when I was very young from China, and I don't think that my life was ever, filled with the same elements or the same environments that I paint. I paint a lot of kind of alien, surreal women in creepy fantasy landscapes, and I've kind of lived in cities for the most of my life. So perhaps subconsciously I'm painting a lot of wild, natural settings in order to kind of get away from the urban jungle, which I currently live in. But the personal aspect of my pieces, I think, is reflected in just my personal taste. I'm a huge fan of sci-fi. I love Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones. So generally, the media that I like to consume is pretty heavy in the fantasy sci-fi realm. I'm actually not a huge video game player, and I'm not an unfan of fantasy, but I haven't really dabbled or been, very experience with like fantasy novels, fantasy card games, fantasy games. And generally when I watch movies, I prefer kind of like sci-fi action, sci-fi thriller over fantasy films. But for some reason, I like to paint a lot of surreal fantasy, and I really can't pinpoint why. I think generally these things are unexplainable, and that's kind of the magic of art and the way artists see the world. It doesn't always have to have an actual explanation, so I kind of just go with what my gut and my spirit tells me to paint, and the things that I find most interesting just happen to be these kind of surreal fantasy women. But yeah, I wouldn't say that my art is super personal. I don't paint, like literal stories or experiences from my childhood, but they are personal to me because they are a reflection of kind of what my inner dialogue gravitates towards most naturally. Okay, the next question is from Ellen Fitzpatrick, and she says, "Hey Happy, I'm trying to get into filming my paintings, but I can't figure out what angle/setup to use. Every time I try, I always get my head in the way and I end up bumping into my tripod when I move my chair, or it's at a funny angle that distorts the art. I was wondering what your filming setup looks like. Your videos always look so professional." Well, thank you, Ellen. And I'm sad to say this, but I think the things you mentioned about bumping your head or funny angles that distort the art, I encounter those problems all the time to this day. It takes a lot of practice to get used to being cognizant of your space and where your camera is. over time, as you practice, you'll kind of naturally know where to maybe angle your head or where to lean to avoid hitting your camera. But yeah, for me, it still happens all the time, especially with painting videos. I have a huge rolly chair I like to sit on. It takes up a lot of space because it's comfortable, and the rolly chair always accidentally knocks onto the tripod and the camera, and then I have to reposition everything. But generally, a rule of thumb I like to follow to help avoid, for example, getting my head in the shots, is if I have an overhead shot, like if I'm filming myself drawing on a table surface, I will not put the camera directly over the drawing. And I know that might be weird because you want kind of almost the most straight on angle, but for me, I do push the camera back a little bit and have it point at the drawing, not directly from overhead, but from, a slightly off distance. And it does distort the drawing a little bit, but not too much to the point where it's unnoticeable. So you just kind of got to find that magic distance where your head won't get in the way, and also it won't distort your image too much. And I also use Adobe Premiere. I haven't actually used this feature because I'm okay with slight distortions, but I know Adobe Premiere has a feature where you can probably change up the angle of the shot or transform it in a way that kind of negates the distortion. I'm not quite sure. I haven't actually done this, but I'm pretty sure that there's an option available in various video editing programs for you to undo the distortion from your camera angle. And also, when I shoot a tripod at a vertical easel, so most of my painting time lapses, I also angle them in a way where, as you can see, even with this one, it's slightly distorted. I'm shooting from the left side of the screen, and I'm shooting my right hand painting it. So this is why filming time lapses takes a long time, and people don't realize this. They're like, well, why don't you just turn on the camera, and it doesn't require any extra work from painting without filming. But painting with filming takes a lot of extra effort because you have to set up all your shots, you have to readjust your shots when you accidentally bump into your tripod or your camera, and also you have to lean away from the screen. So just over time, my body naturally is aware that a camera is pointed from the left side, so I never lean to the left. I always lean to the right, and I kind of get a little bit of back pain on my right side because I'm not balanced throughout the day, and I'm kind of putting too much strain on my right side. But yeah, that is kind of the price you pay to get that perfect shot. So I hope these tips help. Okay, next question is from Raina Perry, and she asks, do you think you'll ever draw males in the future? I think you could paint very lovely surreal men along the same themes as you do with your women. Yeah, I definitely would not rule out the possibility of drawing a male or painting a male. I even have a few concept sketches that feature men, and I have painted men before. So for a few commissions I've done, I've painted men, and I also think I have painted Michael Jackson before, who's like my favorite singer of all time, and I've also painted, I think, Steph Curry back in the day when the Warriors won the NBA Finals. But yeah, I haven't painted men in a while, and again, it's nothing deliberate. I'm not trying to avoid painting men or trying to make a statement of any sort. I simply just enjoy painting women more. It's what my gut and what my spirit prefers, and I just paint to basically fulfill all of the urges that my creative side has. And currently, in the time being, I seem to only want to paint women. But yeah, I'm definitely not ruling out the possibility of painting men. Anything is possible. Okay, the next question is from Ella Green, and she asks, do you have any tips or tricks for doing art every day? I always put off practicing art even though I want to practice. Yeah, that is a really tough one, especially if you have other things to do, like if you're not doing art full-time as a student or as a career, and you have other things going on in your life. How do you hold yourself accountable? How do you make sure that you get your practice in and not succumb to laziness or distractions or artist block? For me, I found that bullet journaling has really helped, and I might make a separate video on this soon about basically a collection of my tips and tricks on how to practice at home and actually, get your practice sessions in and get the work done. But for the time being, for this video, I think off the top of my head, I would recommend you to write out a schedule of some sort, whether you have a Google Calendar or a schedule on your phone that will set you a reminder, maybe 15 minutes or 30 minutes before to practice. So whatever you're doing, just quickly wrap it up and finish and prepare for your practice sessions. You really have to set aside time, make time for these things, because if it's not a deadline or something crucial or something that is required of you, like let's say a school homework deadline or a work deadline, if it's something of you for your personal gain, just to practice and to have fun, you tend to push it back. It tends to fall low on your list of priorities. But it's still equally important, because the small practice sessions you do every day are an investment towards your overall progress. So you really do just have to book time on your calendar. And I also find that using some sort of timer or some sort of way to measure how many hours you're getting in also helps. For me, I used to use like the stopwatch on my phone. So I would start the stopwatch whenever I began a practice session. I would pause it if I took a break to like eat something or take a walk, and then I would restart the stopwatch every time I sit back down at my easel. And I just wanted to track how many hours of actual easel time I was spending every day. And I would set little weekly goals for myself. Like, I want to paint 20 hours this week total. And so the hours that I counted every day, I would write down and make sure that I was on the right pace to fulfill my weekly goals. Okay, the next question is from Steph Urso, and she asks, how long did it take you to be really comfortable with oil paint? And do you have any ideas for drills or practicing techniques to help a noob just starting with oils? So for me to become really comfortable with oil paint, it took a really long time. When I first tried oil paint, I had no experience with any color medium. So I was just doing photorealistic black and white pencil drawings of my favorite celebrities. And I tried colored pencil, but I wasn't very good at it. I maybe did 1 or 2 colored pencil pieces. I had no experience with watercolor or acrylics. And so when I dove into oils, I was around 13 and I was watching Bob Ross on TV, and I was like, I want to try this. So I bought a bunch of paints, not knowing what I was doing, and it was a complete mess. Like, I didn't know how to use my brush, didn't know how to mix my paint, didn't know anything about the kind of physics and chemistry of how oils and solvents and mediums interacted. And yeah, it was just a hot mess, and I gave up, and I didn't revisit oils until much later in life, when I had years of experience with watercolor, acrylics, and colored pencils and pastels, and just learned how to work with color more. So when I picked up oils for the second time, the learning curve was way less steep, because I had already had an experience with, how to use a brush, or how to control a brush stroke, or what colors look good together, or what colors to mix to create this color, and things like that. So I would say if you're just starting out and you feel very scared, or if oil painting is too frustrating and you just can't seem to get a grasp on it, is to definitely practice using a brush and to practice your color theory, because with oils, like, the two biggest, I guess, benefits and also the two biggest skills you have to have are color and brush techniques. Also, if you're just starting out, I guess some ideas for practicing techniques or drills is to do studies on smaller canvases, and also to keep your colors to a minimum. So keep your palette to just a few colors. Don't overcomplicate yourself. Don't bite off more than you can chew. I would say just do a few simple landscapes or studies or still lifes using just a limited color palette. There are lots of tutorials you can find online of people painting, like a forest or, a pear or an apple or things like that. So yeah, definitely start off simple, start off with less colors, and try to brush up your colors and brush techniques. Okay, the next question is from Olivia Skiffington, and she says, I've realized I've gotten stuck with drawing/painting portraits from the same perspective, setting, and facial expressions. How can I keep my style and overall theme consistent but not repetitive and boring? You're one of my biggest inspirations. Love you and your work. Thank you so much, Olivia. I guess I also have the same problem as you described. I oftentimes struggle to find the balance of keeping my signature theme and my signature aesthetic without being too repetitive and too boring, not just for the people that view my work, but also for myself. Sometimes I also get bored painting similar things over and over again. I would say for me, a general rule of thumb is if I discover something new, like for example, this new eerie, inhuman looking alien skin tones for this piece, I like to try to explore it with more than just one piece. Maybe I would say around 3 to 5 pieces to explore something new that I like. That way I can fully, put in the practice and the polish needed to really get a good grasp of a new style that I like and become, I guess, more proficient in it. But then after 3 or 5 of the same or similar pieces, I can decide, do I want to keep this? Do I want to keep going? Or should I maybe evolve this into something else or tweak some things? So generally 3 to 5 pieces of something that looks really, really similar, and then I force myself to add a little twist or change it up a little bit. That being said, you don't want to be too inconsistent, and you shouldn't pressure yourself to always be coming up with new things. It is so much pressure. There is a limit to how many new ideas we can come up with in a finite amount of time and a finite amount of paintings we can do. So I wouldn't beat yourself up too much over not having a new original idea for every single piece. It's okay to be repetitive. It's okay to be consistent. Tweak little things at a time. You don't have to tweak the entire painting. So for example, if you enjoy painting girls with flowers, you don't have to force yourself to randomly start painting like, I don't know, a scenery with like a boat sailing in the moonlight or something. You don't have to do something completely opposite, but maybe, instead of the same girl in the same pose with flowers, you could try zooming it out a little bit and, painting the full figure, or perhaps a girl with her back turned to the viewer instead of always a full frontal. Or, instead of using the same types of flowers, you could experiment with different species of flowers, different types of plants, different types of foliage. Maybe you could try adding an animal to your piece or changing up the color palette. Like, there's so many little ways you can tweak your pieces and still keep your style consistent without, forcing yourself to come up with too many new concepts, which will overwhelm you. So yeah, I hope this helps. Okay, next question. Jordan McDougall asks, do you have a sketchbook, and would you ever consider doing a sketchbook tour video? Those are my favorite. I actually do have a sketchbook. I have many sketchbooks, and I mainly use them for rough concept sketches or for jotting down ideas. Like if I suddenly feel or think of an idea that I think would have potential to become a good piece of artwork, or, potential to be a good painting, I quickly roughly sketch like a thumbnail in my sketchbook. So my sketchbooks are not very pretty and they're not very complete. I've seen a lot of sketchbook videos on YouTube. I love them as well. And a lot of the other artists' sketchbooks are so colorful and beautiful, and they use it almost as like a travel diary or some sort of visual journal. And it's all, just very captivating and interesting, and there's so many different layouts and spreads and compositions. Mine are extremely messy, and they're not really used for any purpose other than documenting concepts and ideas. So I don't know if I would ever film a sketchbook tour, because I just don't feel like it would be a very interesting video to watch, because it'll all be very rough black and white sketches. Nothing would be very complete or well rendered or pretty. And a lot of times when I do sketches, like, they're almost illegible. Like, you can't, like, no one except for me knows what I'm talking about or what I'm drawing. Sometimes to the average viewer, it will look like just random ugly scribbles. So yeah, I'm not quite sure how my sketchbook tour would look. It would probably be very boring. So I'll have to get back to you on that, Jordan. Okay, Macy Liu asks, do you think some artists might have to move to a bigger city to get discovered and shown in galleries? Or do you think it's more about social media and the people you know? What if an artist struggles in both areas, social media and in-person connections? Well, I've definitely been there, feeling the struggle from every single angle, so you're not alone, Macy Liu. But I would say that it really doesn't matter where you live, and I don't think you need to get discovered as an artist. I don't even know if that's a thing, to be honest. Sometimes I still feel like I'm still learning myself, and I still have so many things to figure out and so many mistakes that I've made that I need to, correct or learn from. So I'm not even sure if getting discovered is a thing. It might be a thing. I just maybe am not aware of it. But for me, I found that social media has really shifted the landscape of art and the entire art scene. And I think we're actually at a crossroads where we're entering kind of uncharted territory, and we haven't really ever tested or have much data and experience with how social media influences an art career or the entire art industry. Because I do find that with Instagram and YouTube and social media, artists are able to build their own platform, build their own collector audience, and not rely on a third party to discover them, to catapult them to fame. Artists can kind of do that on their own and be their own managers and things like that. So I don't think the city you live in matters, but that being said, I do think there is a benefit to living in a city with a very active local art scene and art community. So I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, but not only here. I think cities like Portland or Seattle, those are all the cities I've been to, but I'm sure there are lots more around the United States, LA, Miami, New York, a lot of places on the East Coast. But having a local active art community really helps you have a lot more opportunities to earn money and be seen. There's lots of art fairs, street fairs, and various events where you can display your art and try to sell it to a local market. And through that, not only do you have a potential of meeting someone who could give you more opportunities or buy more work from you, but you also kind of have more practice on your own, knowing how to talk about your work, knowing how to connect with your audience, knowing more about kind of the business side of things and the sales side of things. So I do say I do recommend trying to be active in your local art community, despite the size. If your local small town only has one like street fair a year, it doesn't hurt to ask to see if you can get a booth to sell some prints or to just even talk to people and just get your work out there. But yeah, in terms of getting discovered, I don't know if that's a thing that I've had experience with, so I can't really speak to it. I do know some artists, if they're able to land a solo show with a huge famous gallery, it really does help put their name and the attention on them to like a bunch of art publications and other art galleries. But yeah, I would say if you're just starting out, like that's not a very realistic thing to expect so soon, because a lot of these art galleries or art publications that discover people and manage their careers and make their careers, these rely on a very complicated inner network of, I don't even know how it works, honestly. But yeah, I would say try as hard as you can to continue to build up your social media presence and also engage with your local art scene. And if you do, it's always a good thing to set your goals high and to dream big. And, I myself have very lofty goals that I often daydream about that I know won't happen overnight, but I still definitely keep them in the back of my mind as a source of motivation to keep going. So if you do really want to aim big and try to get the attention of a huge famous gallery or famous art magazine, always continue to follow them on social media or in person and see what types of artists they bring on, see the types of artworks that they enjoy, that they believe in, and see if you're a good fit, or think about what you can do to practice more, to improve more, to get to that level. But yeah, I don't think where you live has a huge impact on your success or your potential as an artist, because I've seen so many really talented and famous and successful artists who live in very small towns whose work and business mostly happens, via mail or via the internet. So yeah, keep going, Macy. I know you can do it. I believe in you. Matt Leo asks, "Hi, Happy. How do you select your color palette for each painting? I mean, what would be your thought process, and do you test it out in a small painting first before you jump into the real piece? Thanks." Yes, I highly recommend testing out your color palettes on a small study. It doesn't even have to be anything fancy or anything well rendered. It could even be a matter of just mixing a few colors and putting it on your palette or a scrap sheet of paper to see how they look and interact with each other and how well they mix. But yeah, I think doing studies, especially when you don't have a lot of experience with colors and color theory yet, can really help you help set guidelines for your final piece. The worst pain ever is when you have a giant canvas and you have to constantly be repainting and fixing mistakes and feeling lost. So doing a study on a smaller canvas first will definitely help alleviate some of that stress and help set you in the right direction. For me personally, I select my color palette in a very organic, hard to explain way. There's really no exact mechanical thought process. I kind of just do a concept sketch and I have an image of it already in my mind's eye, like in my brain. And sometimes that image is very detailed, from the concept, the composition, to the colors, to the little details. And sometimes it's very vague. Sometimes I only have a black and white version of what I want the painting to be in my mind's eye. So it really varies. But most of the time when I sit down and I complete the underpainting or the concept sketch, complete the monochromatic portion, I start to have these rough ideas or spurts of inspiration of what I want the colors to be. And I kind of just go with the flow and listen to my mind's eye. That being said, there are a few situations where I really have no idea what colors I want, and I either do a small color study with oils if I'm not sure how to use the colors, or lately I've also used Photoshop. So I'll just take a photo of my painting and I'll try different colors. I'll just paint on it digitally, really roughly, just to see how the colors look next to each other. So Photoshop and digital ways of trying out and testing things is also a great way to figure out and finalize your color palettes without the fear of having to mess up your painting and then having to redo it. Okay, this question is really interesting. It's from Gongina, or Gongina. Sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, but she asks, I'm wondering, what are your thoughts about pop surrealism and what do you think it stands for? Also, what are your thoughts about kitsch art? So pop surrealism, I have done some reading on it. I was first exposed to it by Mark Ryden, who is one of my favorite artists of all time, and he's often dubbed as the father of pop surrealism. I think, based on my readings, in the beginning, pop surrealism was defined by it's synonymous with lowbrow art, which is a term that means, here, I'll just read you guys the Wikipedia page because they can describe it more eloquently. But lowbrow art describes an underground visual art movement that arose from Los Angeles, California in the late 1970s. It is a populist art movement with its cultural roots in underground comics, punk music, and hot rod cultures of the street. It is often known by the name pop surrealism. Lowbrow art often has a sense of humor. Sometimes the humor is gleeful, sometimes impish, and sometimes it is a sarcastic comment. So I think lately, though, pop surrealism has kind of branched away from its lowbrow roots and started to mean something different. And when I first discovered started reading about the actual term of pop surrealism and what it means today, I was reading this book by Camilla de Erico, who is another amazing artist, and she has this great book called Pop Painting: Inspiration and Techniques from the Pop Surrealism Art Phenomenon. And in it, I just really love the way she described pop surrealism. So let me again read you her passage directly so that I don't tarnish it with my fumbled explanation. But let's see. She says, Wikipedia would say that pop surrealism came from lowbrow art and that it is an interchangeable label. However, I disagree. Although lowbrow art shares similarities with pop surrealism, there is a very distinct difference between the two of them for me. Lowbrow artists began mixing comics, characters, and other pop culture elements into their paintings in the 1970s, creating artwork that featured low-end imagery that could be placed in a high-end gallery. But when lowbrow moves in a dark and underground direction, pop surrealism has a brighter, more whimsical, and more playful nature, often containing elements of both humor and bizarreness. Yes, pop surrealism may have a connection to lowbrow. However, I believe that pop surrealism has taken a life of its own and expanded beyond its lowbrow roots. When I think of pop surrealism, I think of it in the following manner. Pop refers to pop culture and the surreal part to the Dali-esque nature of the imagery. In my paintings, gravity doesn't exist, animals blend into fruit, and time and space are not concerns. Pop surrealism is about bending the rules of physics and mixing in characters viewers will recognize from cartoons, history, and fiction to create a whimsical and playful image. And that is the definition by Camilla D'Errico. She also wrote another passage that really spoke to me, and I'm going to read this again, a direct quote from her book, and that is, "Art movements are created in hindsight. We reflect on what happened, and that's how we're able to label and identify them. For those artists like myself and others working within the movement, creating art before there was even a label, we didn't pattern our art after something that we saw, but rather created it on the precipice of defining the style, giving the movement its foundation. My fellow pop surrealists and I actively created the art without being consciously aware of what we had to do in order to be pop surrealists." And she goes on to say that people often ask her how she feels about being labeled a pop surrealist, whether she likes it. And she says that she doesn't mind it at all because she doesn't use it as a limitation or like a guideline for how she creates her work. And here's another quote from her. It says, "I create art for myself. Whether or not it fits within the confines of the definition of pop surrealism is up for interpretation. However, I believe that artists within the movement dictate what pop surrealism is, simply by breaking boundaries and continuously creating new and diverse art." So that is, I really, really agree with her definition of pop surrealism. I think that, when we find a group of artists working in similar themes during a similar time period or in a similar physical location, it's really easy to slap a label on it because I think humans love labeling things and categorizing them, and that's how we're able to recognize things and communicate them with each other. But I really don't feel like pop surrealism has that rigid kind of lowbrow pop culture, comic book, underground punk definition that it started off as. I see it the way that Camilla D'Errico sees it, and that's art that has a surreal vibe to it that breaks a lot of rules, that has elements of fantasy and anti-gravity and anti-logic. And I love how she sees it, and I love that she says she's not defined or limited by the category that her art happens to fall under. And I feel the same way about mine. When I started creating art, I wasn't like, oh, I love pop surrealism, I want to be a pop surrealist painter. But rather, I had been doing art for a while, and I had a very good idea of what my aesthetic was and what my taste and my theme and my subject matter is in my paintings. And when I read about pop surrealism, especially the way that Camilla D'Errico defined it, it really spoke to me, and I felt like this is very similar to my style of art. So if I was to label myself, I want to choose pop surrealism because it sounds the most like my art. But that doesn't mean that, I am the best example of pop surrealism, or that I, create my art with the intention of fitting into pop surrealism. I simply just create art that I enjoy, and I think this is just the closest label I can find for it. And quickly, in regards to your question about kitsch art, Kitsch, there are many different definitions and many different interpretations of that word, but for the sake of answering your question, I'm just going to assume the definition of kitsch you were asking me about is when people call kitsch art basically cheap and common, mass-produced, because it appeals to kind of the common denominator, the average population. It's not progressive, it's not avant-garde, and it's generally used as a negative term to call art or artist basic or too simple or too commercial. I personally don't have any negative opinions towards that, and I really dislike when people label art as kitsch or calling it like, oh, this is not real art because all you're doing is painting like a pretty girl with a pretty landscape. Like, this is so stupid and like, silly and childish. Like, I don't like that attitude because I feel like all artists started off as children, as beginners, and a lot of our first exposures to the art world and the art industry was through art that's labeled as kitsch. And so many really successful, popular artists today grew up being exposed to comic books and cartoons and popular artists. So I really think it's very limiting to use terms that, negatively label a style of art just because it doesn't fit with some high fancy standard set by some fancy art critic. But I don't have an art history degree. I don't have any experience in this industry of critiquing art, but this is just kind of my personal take on it. I think we should live and let live and just let people do what makes them happy. So yeah, that about wraps up the questions for today. Thank you all so much for watching and for all of your support. And I hope you guys have a lovely rest of the summer, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.